The thing about gardening that no one tells you is that it's the slowest kind of victory you'll ever earn. Months of digging, hauling soil, pruning, watering, weeding, watching, adjusting, all for a few weeks of bloom if you do it right. And on that particular bright Saturday morning, I was standing in the middle of my backyard in my red and black checkered flannel shirt, coffee in one hand and hose in the other, looking at the result of 3 solid years of that grind. A fully matured, layered, planned-out garden that finally looked exactly how I saw it in my head when it was just dirt and a sketch in a notebook. The sun was already high and sharp, lighting up every color, the purple salvia in the back, the bright yellow coreopsis, the red coneflowers, the climbing roses on the trellis by the fence, the raised beds with herbs neatly labeled in wooden markers I'd carved myself, and the small flagstone path winding from my patio to the far corner where a Japanese maple cast delicate shadows over a stone bench. I'd built all of it myself, dug the beds, installed the drip lines, mixed compost, studied plant hardiness zones like a man cramming for an exam, and now the whole space buzzed softly with bees, rustling leaves, and the faint hum of sprinklers ticking in the neighbor's yard. It was the first time I'd looked at it all and thought, yeah, this is exactly what I was trying to do. I was in the middle of adjusting a soaker hose when I heard my neighbor Mike call from the fence. "Dude," he said, leaning on the top rail with his usual travel mug, "your yard looks like one of those catalog pictures now." I shrugged, but I couldn't hide the smile. "Took long enough." "Nah," he said, "you grew it, you earned it." I was about to joke that if the tomatoes didn't start cooperating, I might rip the whole thing out and pave it when I heard it. The heavy, purposeful footsteps on my side yard gravel that only meant one thing in this neighborhood. The HOA was coming to inspect something I did not ask them to inspect. I turned just in time to see Mark from the Homeowner Association stride around the corner with a clipboard hugged to his chest, sunglasses on, 2 volunteers behind him with matching clipboards and nervous faces. His eyes swept the garden slowly, and I watched the exact moment appreciation morphed into possessiveness. He boomed, stepping onto my patio without being invited. "Excellent. The project is ready." I frowned. "What project?" "The HOA Landscaping Initiative," he said grandly, gesturing at my yard like Vanna White. "Our new community garden pilot program." Mike choked on his coffee. "You're what?" Mark ignored him. "This," he said, sweeping his arm dramatically across my backyard, "is a stunning example of what visionary HOA leadership can achieve when residents follow our guidelines." I stared at him. "You didn't do any of this," I said. "I did, with my hands, with my weekends, with my paycheck." "Under HOA direction," he snapped. "You weren't even in office when I planted half of this," I said. "DTILS," he said, waving that away. "The important thing is that this garden now represents the HOA's commitment to beautification." Mike shook his head. "You didn't buy a single plant." One of the volunteers, a younger guy, quietly added, "Or mulch, or soil, or seed." Mark turned and glared at him until he shut up. Then he faced me, extra authoritative. "This garden," he said, tapping his clipboard, "has been selected as the official demonstration plot for our new HOA brochure." "No, it hasn't," I said, "because that would require my permission." "Which you are thrilled to give," he replied without listening. "I am not," I said. "I haven't agreed to anything," Mark sniffed. "You do not need to agree. The HOA has decided to feature this space as an example of proper compliance with our landscaping expectations." "You mean the expectations you rewrote last month to match my yard?" I said, "after you saw what it looked like in full bloom." Mark smiled like I'd complimented him. "Yes, a brilliant move if I say so myself. We updated our standards to reflect your success. You should be honored that we have adopted your approach as the official HOA style." "Honored," I repeated. "You tried to find me the first year for having unapproved garden shapes." Mike raised his mug. "I remember that." "You said his beds were threateningly organic." Mark nodded proudly. "And look how far we've come. Through MY leadership, we have transformed a rogue garden into a model space." I laughed. "You didn't transform anything. You just stopped sending me angry letters after I sent you the approved landscape plan the city signed off on." The volunteers shifted uncomfortably. One whispered, "He did file that plan, sir." Mark cleared his throat loudly, ignoring him. "As I was saying," he continued, "this garden will be photographed this week for our website, newsletter, and brochure." "No," I said, "it won't." The word hung there between us. Mark blinked. "Excuse me? You can't use my yard in your brochure," I said. "Not as an HOA project. This is my personal property, my design, my labor, my plants." Mark scoffed. Don't be petty. We have a real opportunity here. I have already submitted photos and a description to the Regional Botanical Society." That stopped me cold. "You what?" "The society," he said. "They run some sort of neighborhood showcase program. I nominated the HOAS Garden Initiative." "You mean my garden?" I said slowly. "I mean the community's vision implemented under HOA guidelines," he said. I sent them photos and a lovely WRITUP about OUR strategic GRENSPACE development. Murmured, "Wow, fancy way to say we stole your hard work." "You wrote that?" I asked. "Yes," Mark said. "I described how the HOA designed and directed this transformation." Something in me snapped, not loudly, more like the quiet noise a root makes when it breaks underground. "You lied," I said. "We do not use such harsh words in this community," Mark replied. "We call it reframing." You told the Botanical Society this was an HOA project, I asked. Of course, he said. Why wouldn't I? Do you think they want to hear about some random guy puttering around in his backyard? They appreciate organized, top DOWNEFFORTS. I stared at him. You sent them photos of my yard without telling them who actually built it, he smiled. It is all part of the HOAS brand. We must present a united front. That's fraud, I said. No, he said. It is community outreach. Greg's head appeared over the other fence. What's he doing now? He nominated my garden for some kind of Botanical Society showcase, I said, and took credit for it as an HOA project. Greg laughed. Of course he did. Mark stood taller. You should be thanking me. When they feature this place, everyone will know how exceptional our HOA is. They'll think you did the work, I said. Yes, he replied. And you live here, so you benefit too. Everyone wins. No, I said. I don't win if someone else lies about what I built. No one cares who put the plants in the ground, Mark snapped. They care about the brand, the organization, the leadership, ME. Mike shook his head. He said the quiet part out loud. Mark planted his clipboard under his arm. Anyway, the society sent an email this morning. They were very impressed and want to visit. Visit, I echoed. When? Tomorrow, he said, beaming. In full daylight, I will give them a guided tour of OUR masterpiece. He said our like a king talking about his army. I swallowed the urge to throw my coffee into the sedum patch. You are not touring them through my garden, Mark laughed. I already confirmed with them. It's all arranged. They think I'm the coordinator. Coordinator, I asked. Of the HOAS landscape program, he said, which again you should be honored to have inspired. I'm not inspired, I said. I'm furious. Mark rolled his eyes. Don't be dramatic, you'll be there. You can stand quietly and smile while we discuss our vision. And that's when it clicked. He really believed it. In his head, my blood, sweat, and soil testing were just props in his performance. You didn't tell them my name, I said. Didn't seem relevant, he said. I used HOA Garden Project Leadership, ITS Cleaner. You need to email them, I said. Correct it, tell them the truth, Mark snorted. No, I will not sabotage this opportunity. This is good publicity for the HOA. And if they find out you lied, I asked. Mark smiled like he'd checkmated a chessboard he didn't know how to play. Why would they? They're just plant people. He turned to leave, satisfied. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., spruce yourself up. We have a showcase to host. As he disappeared around the corner with his volunteers shuffling behind him, Mike whistled low. He just stole your garden. Not yet, I said, staring at the fountain of color I'd built with my hands, now hijacked in someone else's story. He just invited the wrong people to see it. Because what Mark didn't understand was simple. The Botanical Society didn't just like pretty gardens, they liked accuracy, records, and credit where it was due. And tomorrow, when they walked through that gate, they weren't going to hear his version of the story. They were going to hear mine. If there's one thing gardening teaches you, it's patience. But patience becomes a whole different sport when you're dealing with Mark and his clipboard brigade. So by the time the sun rose the next morning and painted my backyard in warm gold, I was already up, already dressed in my checkered flannel, already tending the beds, and already preparing for war because I knew Mark wasn't just going to stroll in politely when the Botanical Society arrived. No, he was going to show up early, loud, and ready to seize credit for everything from the soil acidity to the way the bees hovered around the lavender. I'd barely finished adjusting a trellis when I heard clattering on the side path, fast, frantic clattering. And then Mark burst into my backyard with 2 volunteers behind him, each carrying a stack of laminated HOA pamphlets like ammunition. Mark looked around with the confidence of a tour guide who'd never actually seen the place he was touring, and he barked, "We must prepare the site for the society's arrival. They will be here in 40 minutes. I didn't turn. You're not prepping anything. Incorrect, he declared. The HOA has assumed temporary control of this area to ensure it meets professional presentation standards. Mike appeared at the fence again, sipping coffee. Does that mean you're finally gonna learn what mulch is? Mark ignored him. Volunteers placed the signage. One volunteer hesitantly asked, "Where should it go?" Mark waved grandly. "Everywhere." And over the next 15 seconds, they began sticking HOA-branded signs into my yard, tiny white markers that read things like, HOA-approved wildflower zone, official community herb planting, and the one that made my stomach twist, HOA-designed signature garden. I practically sprinted over. Nope, absolutely not. I ripped the nearest sign out of the soil. "This is property defacement," Mark shouted. "This is my yard," I said. "You don't get to label it like it's your science project. This showcase reflects HOA excellence," he said. "It must be clear to observers who is responsible." "I am responsible," I said. "I built this." "Under HOA guidance," Mark insisted. "You didn't guide anything," I said. "You fined me for uneven soil once." "That was before I realized your potential," he said, straightening proudly. "You are an asset and an extension of HOA vision." "I'm not your intern," I said, "and my yard is not your brochure." Mark opened his mouth to shout again, but before he could, we all heard a car door slam out front. Mark gasped. "They're early," he grabbed the volunteers. Positions, Mike muttered. "This man watches way too much cable news." But Mark sprinted to the front yard with the volunteers in tow. I stayed behind, quietly pulling out every fake sign they'd planted until the garden looked like itself again. A moment later, I heard voices, three of them, calm, professional, clearly impressed. One said, the photos did not do justice to the scale. Another said, the layering work alone is remarkable. A third murmured, excellent use of native perennials, mature, healthy, carefully curated. Then Mark's voice exploded across the yard. Welcome, esteemed members of the Botanical Society. I am the HOAS landscape coordinator and project lead. Mike peeked over the fence. This is going to be good. The three men rounded the corner into the backyard with Mark leading them like a parade marshal. They were all older, dressed in khaki shirts with embroidered society logos, clipboards in hand, the kind of men who spent decades cataloging plant species and judging competitions. Their eyes widened as they entered, taking in the garden from top to bottom. The first man said, outstanding craftsmanship. The second said, textbook soil staging. The third leaned in toward a rosemary bush and inhaled deeply. Perfect pH. Mark beamed like he had personally whispered instructions to every root. Yes, yes, our HOA put significant effort into creating this space. It represents MONTHS of collaboration between myself and the community. One society member asked, did you handle the design personally? Mark puffed up. I provided extensive direction. Mike choked on his coffee. I stepped forward before Mark could continue rewriting history. Hi, gentlemen, I said. I'm glad you're here. I'm the homeowner. Mark whirled on me. This is not your turn to speak. One society member frowned. He's the homeowner. Yes, Mark said quickly, but he merely executed our plan. The HOA is responsible for, really? The oldest botanist asked. Because the nomination email made it sound like an HOA-led community garden. Exactly, Mark declared triumphantly. But this isn't community land, the botanist said. This is private property, Mark blinked. Well, yes, the HOA oversaw the entire, the second botanist interrupted. You oversaw the soil development? Yes, Mark lied boldly. Every grain, you selected the species layout, the botanist asked. Absolutely. You designed the irrigation flow, with great care, and you drafted the companion planting map. Of course, I finally stepped closer, calm as a man who had been waiting for this exact trap to close. Ask him what a soil meter is. The botanist turned. A what? Mark froze. A soil meter is obviously a device used to measure. He trailed off like someone slowly disconnecting from reality. I folded my arms. Ask him what kind of soil this is. The oldest botanist nodded slowly. Yes, Mr. HOA coordinator, what soil composition did you choose for these beds? Mark opened his mouth, then closed it. Well, the thing about soil is that there are many types. One botanist raised an eyebrow. Which type is this? Mark panicked. The good one. Mike dropped his forehead onto the fence, laughing silently. I continued, ask him which plants are native and which ones I imported. The botanist turned again. Yes, tell us which species are native. Mark's voice cracked. The green ONES, one botanist blinked. They're all green. Exactly, Mark said as if he'd won something. I stepped forward. Gentlemen, I built this garden, I designed it, I sourced the plants, I built the irrigation, I kept logs, I submitted soil tests, I mapped bloom cycles, these hands, I held them up, made this. The botanists looked relieved, like they finally found the person who actually spoke their language. The lead botanist asked, may we see your documentation? I nodded and handed him a binder, thick, organized, labeled. Mark stared at it like it was written in ancient runes. The botanist flipped through it, eyes widening. This, one whispered, is professional-level work. Another murmured, your seasonal planning projections are impeccable. The third said, you did this alone. I nodded. Every bit. Mark tried to shove himself between us. But the HOA provided spiritual guidance. What does that mean? The botanist asked. It means, Mark paused, realizing he had no idea what it meant. It means what it means. The botanist ignored him. The lead one closed the binder. Sir, he said to me, you should have been the one to contact us. This is extraordinary work. Thank you, I said. I tried. He did contact you, Mark snapped. Through me, his representative. The botanist exchanged glances. We were under the impression, one said carefully, that this was a community-created HOA showpiece. But this is clearly a single gardener's achievement. The lead botanist nodded decisively. This nomination will need to be reconsidered with proper attribution. Mark turned white. Reconsidered, but I told them incorrectly, the botanist said, and we take accuracy very seriously. Then he looked at me. May we speak privately after the tour? Of course, I said. Mark looked like someone unplugged him. The moment the lead botanist closed my binder and said they wanted to speak privately, something shifted in the air, not just in the garden but in Mark's entire worldview. It was like watching a building lose its foundation in real time, and as the morning sunlight streamed across the stone path and illuminated the beds I had built from scratch, Mark began scrambling like a man trying to plug leaks in a sinking boat using wet paper towels. Wait, you can't sideline me. He shouted, trying to insert himself between us as the botanists continued their slow walk along the path, studying the garden with a seriousness that made even me stand straighter. I, as community leader, am essential to this process. But the botanist ignored him and stopped at the tall salvia border where bees were lazily drifting from flower to flower. One botanist whispered, healthy pollinator activity. Another said, impressive bloom density. The third traced a finger along a leaf. No pests, no scorch marks, excellent hydration. I could feel Mark vibrating with jealousy beside me. Yes, yes, the HOA enforced a strict watering schedule, he declared, voice cracking. The botanist turned. What watering schedule? Mark froze. The standard one. There is no HOA watering standard, I said. He tried to fine me for excessive enthusiasm in year one. One of the botanists looked at me puzzled. Excessive enthusiasm, I nodded. He said watering at sunrise made my garden look too involved. Mike, still on the fence, burst out laughing so hard he almost spilled his coffee. Mark spun toward him. That is a real issue. Overcommitment to individual projects creates neighborhood imbalance. The botanist raised a brow. That is not a horticultural term. It is an HOA term, Mark insisted. The HOA, the botanist said calmly, is not a horticultural authority. Mark sputtered at that as if the idea was physically painful. I hid a smirk. The botanist kept walking, stopping next at the herb spiral. One crouched, perfectly layered, rosemary on top, basil mid-tier, mint isolated, smart. Another tested the soil with his fingers. Well drained, you amended this with compost, didn't you? 3 cycles, I said, mixed with leaf mulch and coffee grounds, he nodded. Outstanding, Mark lunged forward. Yes, OUR HOAS compost program, I cut him off. Mark threw out my compost bin because he said it was threateningly earthy. The botanist looked horrified. You disposed of a resident's compost, Mark straightened defensively. It attracted WRMS. That is what compost does, the botanist said, but not HOA-approved WRMS, Mark barked. Mike choked on his coffee again. The botanists exchanged a glance somewhere between astonishment and disbelief. They continued to the Japanese maple. One botanist studied the canopy. Excellent pruning. Another said delicate shaping, controlled growth. The third stepped back. This tree has been tended with skill. Mark stepped forward, arms wide like a showman. Yes, it adds exotic flair to the HOAS signature garden. Stop, I said. You tried to make me remove that tree. The botanist froze. He what? He said the leaves looked foreign. All 3 botanists turned sharply toward Mark, whose face turned a strange shade of determination and fear. It did not match the approved color palette, he protested. Gardens, the botanist said slowly, do not have color palettes. Our HOA does, Mark insisted proudly. We have a seasonal shade range beige to burgundy. Greg, who had now joined Mike at the fence, burst out laughing. Your HOA needs therapy. The botanist shook his head and continued. The group reached my stone bench under the maple. One botanist sat on it, testing its stability. Hand-cut flagstone, 20 pieces, I said, placed myself. Remarkable craftsmanship. Mark rushed in. Yes, our HOA invested in that bench. I pinched my nose. He fined me for installing it. The botanist looked up sharply. Why? Mark puffed. Unauthorized sit zone creation. Sit zone? The botanist repeated. Yes, Mark said. Sitting can create traffic patterns that disturb the grass. There is no grass here, the botanist responded flatly. Exactly, Mark shouted as if that proved him right. We walked toward the vegetable beds. The botanist examined the tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, squash, all carefully trellised and thriving. One botanist lifted a single tomato gently. This is competition quality. My chest warmed a little at that. Mark lunged again. Yes, the HOAS agricultural division, I cut him off. He told me vegetables were visual clutter. The botanist froze. He said what? He said food gardens ruin street harmony. The botanist looked at Mark like he was staring at a malfunctioning robot. Food, he said slowly, is not disharmony. In this community it is, Mark barked. We value a clean visual aesthetic. This is a garden, the botanist said, not a showroom, Mark stomped. This is a showcase. And I, as the HOA, will present it as such. The botanist stopped walking entirely. Mr. Rudd, Mark said proudly. Mr. Rudd, the botanist said, voice firm, you have repeatedly taken credit for work that is clearly not yours. Mark's jaw tightened. I represent the HOA, not the gardener. The community is the gardener. No, the botanist said, this man is. He is a member of the community, Mark shouted. Therefore his work is our work. That is not how property rights function, the botanist replied. My turn, tell them what you wrote in your email. Mark froze. I said that the HOA directed under MY leadership the development of this landscape. Directed, the botanist repeated. Yes, you designed it. Yes, the whole thing, the vision, the structure, the. Name one plant, the botanist said, silence. Name one species, he repeated, silence. Name one soil amendment, silence. Name one irrigation method, silence. The botanist leaned forward slightly. Mr. Rudd, do you know anything about this garden? Mark swallowed. I know it is pretty, the botanist sighed. Gentlemen, we have been misled. Mark's whole face collapsed. No, I the HOAWE, you submitted false information, the botanist said. You took credit for work you did not do. It was a group effort, Mark shouted desperately. Which group? The botanist asked sharply. Where are their signatures? Their contributions, their documentation, their names, Mark stuttered. I was going to, the botanist held up a hand. Stop, you have said enough. Then he turned to me. Sir, after reviewing your work, your records, your design, and your maintenance, we have reached a decision. Mark held his breath, shoulders tense, eyes wild. This garden, the botanist continued, deserves recognition, real formal recognition. My heart pounded. But he added, glaring at Mark, we will not recognize the HOA or any organization that attempts to take credit for work they did not do. Mark gasped like a man drowning. You can't do that. We can, the botanist said, and we will. He turned to me. We would like to nominate you personally for our regional residential garden showcase. Mark screamed, "No." The botanist ignored him. We will email you the details. And we may request follow-up photos and interviews. I nodded slowly, stunned. Of course. The botanists gave me their cards, shook my hand, and walked toward the gate. Mark scrambled after them. Wait, you can't remove me from this narrative. It was never your narrative, the botanist said without turning back. And just like that, they were gone. Mark stood frozen in my yard, clipboard trembling in his hand, foundation cracked, ego shattered. And I knew the real meltdown was coming next. Most people don't truly understand what a meltdown looks like. Not the movie kind, not the exaggerated kind, but the real, raw version that happens when a man who has built his entire identity on control suddenly realizes he never had any to begin with. And that was exactly what unfolded in my backyard as the late morning sun shone brightly across the garden beds and Mark stood frozen, processing the Botanical Society's decision like someone who had just watched their reflection shatter in slow motion. The botanist had barely reached the driveway before Mark erupted, clipboard shaking violently in his hands as he stomped toward me, voice rising in a pitch I didn't know was physically possible. You sabotaged the entire presentation," he screamed, jabbing a finger at me with enough force to stir the rosemary leaves. "You deliberately undermined the HOA's hard work." I raised an eyebrow. The HOA didn't do any work. That is irrelevant," he shrieked. Mike leaned on the fence, sipping coffee like this was the best show he'd seen in months. "Buddy," he said, "you practically gift-wrapped the truth for them." "You stay out of this," Mark barked, pointing furiously at him. "This is between me and the THE garden thief." "Garden thief," I repeated. "You stole my photos, my design, my work, my identity, and tried to pass it off as a group project." Mark puffed up like a bullfrog. "I did not steal anything. I reframed IT for community benefit." Greg laughed from the fence. "Community benefit? You didn't even know the name of a single plant." Mark snapped toward him. "I do not need to know the names of plants to be a leader of landscape excellence." "Actually," I said, "that's exactly what you need." "No," Mark shouted. "What I need is compliance, and you have been non-compliant from day one." He stepped so close to the vegetable bed that I held out a hand. "Watch the basil." "I will watch nothing," he screamed. "I am the HOA president and I am in charge, not according to the Botanical Society," I said calmly. His face twitched. "THEYARE nobodies. You submitted to them," I reminded him. "You begged for recognition." "I did not beg, I presented a strategic initiative." He took a shaky breath. "And they THEY completely misunderstood my role." "Because you lied," I said. "They do not understand HOA operational structure. They understand honesty," I said, "which is why they removed you from the nomination." Mark stomped the ground. No, they did not remove me. They are simply confused." I folded my arms. "They literally said they would not recognize the HOA." Mark threw his clipboard onto the flagstone path so dramatically that a butterfly fluttered away from the lavender. "This is an outrage. I will not stand here and be humiliated by men who can't even pronounce Latin names correctly." "You can't pronounce them at all," Mike said. "That is beside the point." Mark spun back to me. "You have destroyed a golden PR opportunity for this community. By telling the truth?" "Yes," he shouted. "The community functions on perception, not truth," Greg whistled. "There it is, the HOA motto." Mark took a deep breath, attempting to collect himself, smoothing down his pink shirt as if that would somehow repair the chaos unfolding. "Listen," he said, trying for calm but landing somewhere between desperate and unhinged, "we can still fix this. All you must do is email the Botanical Society and tell them you worked under MY leadership." I stared at him. "Absolutely not." "But the HOA needs representation," he shrieked. "We need this win, we need prestige, we need credit for something you didn't do." "Yes," he shouted without thinking, then froze. Mike burst out laughing. Greg clapped. I shook my head. "Mark, I am not lying for you." "It is not lying, it is alignment." "No," I said, "it's lying." Mark put both hands on his head. "You don't understand what is at stake." "What's at stake?" I asked. "A newsletter, not just a newsletter." He yelled. "I submitted this garden as part of MYHOA Presidential Performance Review." Mike snorted. "You're what?" Mark kept going, spiraling faster. "The board assesses my accomplishments annually. I use this garden as MY Primary Achievement category." "You took credit for my garden," I said, "to boost your HOA performance." "Yes," he yelled. "And now you have ruined IT." "Mark," I said carefully, "you should have thought of that before you stole my work." "I did not steal your work. I borrowed IT for community representation." "You submitted my photos," I said. "Of course I did. You wrote descriptions in your name," I added. "Yes, you claimed direction and design credit." "I had TO, why?" I asked. "WHY?" he sputtered. "Because I am the president. Everything under this HOA is a reflection of me." "That's not how anything works," I said. "It is how HOA works," Mark snapped. "I am the face of this organization, and if MY Face does not win awards, the board will question MY capabilities." Mike nodded. "They should," Greg added immediately. Mark paced back and forth, tugging at his shirt collar. Will not allow THIS to stand. The board MEETS tonight, and they expect a presentation on this garden as MY flagship project." But you didn't do the project, I said. That is irrelevant, he yelled. They believe I did. And now I must give them something impressive or they will remove me. I raised an eyebrow. So that's what this is really about, he froze. And no, this is about community values. This is about your job, I said. This is about order, he insisted. About structure, about leadership. Then lead by telling the truth, I said. The HOA does not operate on truth, he shouted. It operates on narrative. All three of us stared at him. Did you really just say that out loud? Mike asked. Greg muttered, someone record this. Mark tried to regain composure. Fine, he said stiffly. If the Botanical Society will not support the HOA, I will find someone else who will. He pointed at me again, voice cracking. Make no mistake, this is not over. I will present this garden tonight and I will state under oath that you contributed only minor labor. Under oath, I repeated. HOA meetings are very serious, he yelled. And I will not be made a fool of. Too late, Greg said. Mark turned red, not angry red, but embarrassed red and stomped toward the gate. Expect a formal HOA notice this afternoon. We are not done. And with that, he stormed out, brushing past the tomato vines as if they'd personally betrayed him. Mike shook his head. He's going to do something stupid. Yeah, Greg said, and probably soon. I looked at the garden, at the binder the botanist had praised, at the gate Mark had just slammed behind him. Let him try, I said. He picked the wrong gardener to steal from, because now the Botanical Society knew the truth, and tonight the HOA board would too. If Mark thought the Botanical Society's rejection was the worst thing that could happen to him, he clearly hadn't imagined what the HOA board meeting would look like. After the society emailed every board member a polite but unmistakably stern clarification, stating that the HOA had provided zero contribution to the garden they were shown, and that they were instead recognizing the homeowner, me, for what they called an exceptional demonstration of residential horticultural mastery. So when I walked into the clubhouse that afternoon under a bright sun filtering through the windows, the place smelled like fresh coffee and incoming disaster, and every board member sat stiffly at the long table while Mark stood at the front, sweating metaphorical bullets as he clutched a stack of papers he probably rewrote 12 times. His voice cracked the moment I stepped in. You have some nerve coming here after what you did. I took a seat in the back. It's a public meeting, Mark. Anyone can come. Chairperson Harold rubbed his forehead. Mark, please, let's proceed respectfully. Mark jabbed at his clipboard. Respectfully, he destroyed my the HOA's entire presentation. Your presentation, Harold corrected quietly. The community's presentation, Mark barked, correcting the correction, which he sabotaged by claiming responsibility for the garden we collaborated on. Harold exhaled slowly. Mark, no one collaborated with you. We collaborated in spirit, he insisted. I provided leadership, direction, and moral framework. Greg, sitting behind me, muttered, this man needs therapy and a nap. Mike whispered, and maybe a new job title, spiritual gardener. Mark slammed his folder down on the podium with theatrical force. The Botanical Society has made a grave error. They failed to recognize the HOA's contributions because they were confused. Harold picked up the letter on the table. Their email wasn't confused, Mark. It was clear, very clear. It was clearly wrong, Mark shouted. I submitted our nomination in good faith, but our community member sabotaged IT by misrepresenting his role. His role, Harold asked. He built that garden. With my guidance, Mark yelled. Your guidance, I called from the back. You fined me for planting tomatoes. That was before I realized the potential, he snapped. Harold cleared his throat. Mark, please read your report. Mark straightened dramatically, smoothed his pink shirt, adjusted his papers, and began reading with the swollen pride of a man certain he could rewrite reality through volume alone. The HOA under MY leadership has successfully completed a residential botanical project selected for regional recognition, Harold cut in. That isn't true. Which represents our commitment to beautification and, Mark, Harold said more firmly, you cannot present information that contradicts a formal correction from the Botanical Society. Mark's face twitched. The Botanical Society is mistaken. They failed to acknowledge MY oversight role. What oversight role? Harold asked. Name one responsibility you held. Mark's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Name, Harold repeated. One. I provided strategic direction. How? BY making sure the garden did not deviate from community values. I raised a hand. You said my basil smelled too enthusiastic. Mike whispered, he really did say that. Greg nodded. Yep, the room murmured. Harold opened another envelope on the table. We also received a follow-up from the society clarifying that your email contained false attributions. They documented your claims and sent a copy to us for review. False, Mark sputtered. No. They misunderstood MY terminology. Harold read aloud. Mr. Rudd asserted authorship, design coordination, and horticultural planning despite having no verifiable involvement. They are not qualified to assess involvement, Mark shouted. They are literally botanists, Harold said, and I am an HOA president, Mark boomed proudly. They do not understand political leadership. This isn't political, Harold said. This is gardening, Mark froze. Flicker of panic crossed his face. You can't take their word over mine, Harold sighed. Mark, this is the 4th time this year you've taken credit for someone else's property improvements. No, it is not, he barked. Name one. The community mailbox landscaping, Harold said. You claimed you installed the shrubs, but security cameras showed you tripped over one. Snickers filled the room. That footage was taken out of context, Mark snapped. You cried, Harold said. More snickers. I was in pain, Greg whispered loudly. From tripping over your own ego. Mike nearly fell off his chair. Mark pounded the podium. Enough, I will not be mocked in my own meeting. This community needs structure and leadership, and I am that leader. Harold inhaled deeply. Mark, the board has to consider removing you. Silence dropped like a stone. Mark's clipboard slipped from his hand. Remove ME. Your actions constitute misrepresentation, Harold said. And the society's documentation makes this serious. You can't, Mark shouted. I built this HOA. It existed before you were elected, Harold said. I made it great. You fined a man $75 for having overly expressive pumpkin shapes at Halloween, Harold reminded him. Giggles erupted. The pumpkins were aggressive, Mark insisted. Harold held up a hand. Mark, enough. The board will now vote, Mark gasped. No, 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 you can't do this. You can't take away my authority. Authority isn't something you take, Harold said. It's something you earn. And I have EARNEDIT, Mark cried. I stood up. Mark, you could have just asked to appreciate the garden. You didn't need to steal it. Steal, he repeated. Steal, I was curating community heritage. By stealing, Greg added. Harold raised his hand. Board members, all in favor of removing Mark Rudd as HOA president. Every hand at the table lifted. Every single one, even the treasurer who slept through half the meetings, raised his hand automatically. Mark spun around like the world had betrayed him personally. You all, you can't. It's unanimous, Harold said softly. Effective immediately. Mark's knees buckled. He grabbed the podium. No, this HOA needs me. We need honesty, Harold replied, not fabricated accomplishments. Mark stared at him, jaw trembling. This community, this garden, this neighborhood. You'll fall apart without me. We'll risk it, Harold said. Mark pointed wildly at me. This is your fault. You ruined everything. I watered plants, I said. That's all. You destroyed me, he shouted. You destroyed yourself, I replied. One exaggerated claim at a time. Mark let out a shaking breath, grabbed his clipboard like it was a life raft, and marched toward the exit before pausing in the doorway to yell his final proclamation. This HOA will regret losing me. You have no idea how hard it is to run a community of this complexity. Mike shouted. Then don't come back, Greg added. Doors open, go ahead. And Mark stormed out into the bright afternoon sun, slamming the door so hard a stack of pamphlets fluttered off a table. Harold turned to me. Hayes, would you be willing to help us build a real gardening program, one that actually follows the city guidelines and not whatever Mark invented? I shrugged. If it helps the neighborhood, sure. He smiled. Thank you. As I walked out of the clubhouse, sunlight warming the binder still tucked under my arm, neighbors waved, some giving thumbs up, others smiling knowingly. Because the truth had finally taken root. The HOA didn't need a tyrant, it needed a gardener.